But how did this primitive specimen, Lyra, find herself at the heart of the Cathar Empire's most brutal spectacle? Her journey to the crimson sands of the Zylosian Colosseum began weeks earlier, with the chilling efficiency of an abduction veiled in scientific arrogance, a mere footnote in the grand, self-important annals of the Cathar. Specimen 7291 exhibits unusual resilience. Dr. Nail, a Cathar xenobiologist of some repute, dictated into his official log. His multifaceted eyes, capable of perceiving spectra far beyond human limits, narrowed at the figure across the sterile observation room. Lyra. She sat motionless within her stark, white containment cell, a picture of forced composure. Nail adjusted a dial on his console, the whirring barely audible. Physiological responses to nutrient deprivation are atypical. Mental fortitude appears disproportionate to its biological classification. He made another note, his lanky, six-limbed frame shifting slightly. He was, by Cathar standards, a meticulous scientist. The Cathar. They considered themselves the pinnacle of galactic evolution, a species whose formal diplomatic communications were composed in elegant mathematical poetry and whose philosophy of elevated consciousness through superior evolution was dogma across three spiral arms of the galaxy. And humans? Humans were interesting. Biologically inferior, of course. Erratic. Too fragile for practical labor, too unpredictable for proper, in-depth study without significant restraints. Good for a data point, perhaps. Good for the occasional, well-orchestrated bit of brutal entertainment to remind the 37 assembled species of the natural order. Or so they believed. Lyra remembered the Atacama Desert. The dry heat, the endless expanse of sand and rock under a piercing blue sky. She'd been on a routine training exercise, part of an elite special operations unit. One moment, setting up camp, the familiar weight of her gear a comfort. The next, a disorienting, nauseating shimmer, like heat haze but cold, and the world had fractured into a million prismatic shards. Then, darkness. When she awoke, it was to the sterile confines of the Cathar vessel, already tagged, already a specimen. Specimen 7291. But Lyra wasn't just surviving in her containment cell, she was a coiled spring, observing, learning, cataloging. The Cathar, in their towering arrogance, spoke freely around her, their complex, clicking language a puzzle she was slowly, painstakingly deciphering. Snippets here, repeated phrases there. She learned of their security protocols, their shift changes. And crucially, she learned of their vulnerabilities. A particular range of sonic frequencies caused them acute discomfort, making their iridescent skin ripple in distress. They had a critical reliance on specific atmospheric filters in their environmental suits when outside their own ships or climate-controlled habitats. Little things. Important things. One Cathar guard, Xylos, was different. Or perhaps Lyra just willed him to be. Most of his species looked through her, their expressions a mixture of clinical detachment and faint disgust. Xylos, younger than most of the guards, sometimes let his gaze linger. Not with malice, but with something else. Pity. Unlikely for a Cathar. A strange, almost reluctant curiosity. Perhaps. He'd watch her during her daily, methodical isometric exercises, movements the Cathar scientists, including the esteemed Dr. Nail, had dismissed in their reports as primitive religious rituals or stress-induced displacement activity. Lyra would feel his multifaceted eyes on her, and she'd push harder, her muscles burning, her focus absolute. During these silent observations, Lyra noticed a recurring geometric symbol. A complex, interlocking design of sharp angles and subtle curves. It was etched onto Kthar technology, woven into the fabric of their stark uniforms, even adorning Xylos's own insignia. The symbol felt familiar. Not in a way she could place, but it stirred a faint, unsettling echo in the depths of her memory, a fragment of a dream, or something older, something buried deep. What was it? The Kthar, for all their advanced technology and self-proclaimed elevated consciousness, were remarkably blind. They measured intelligence by mathematical aptitude and technological advancement. They had no metric for the kind of intelligence that could fashion a weapon from a food utensil, calculate the structural weak points of a containment cell through simple observation, or read the subtle tells in an alien's posture. They didn't understand pathologically adaptable. That was the label military psychologists back on Earth had given her after a particularly grueling series of SEER evaluations. 15 years in elite special operations, fluent in 7 languages, expert in 5 distinct combat disciplines, trained to survive in everything from Arctic tundra to tropical jungle. She hadn't just endured, she'd thrived. Pathologically adaptable. She almost smiled. It was a diagnosis she'd come to embrace. It was a promise. The decision to send her to the Xylosian Colosseum came after what the Kthar termed a failed escape attempt. 2 guards, armed with standard Kthar energy pulse rifles, had ended up unconscious, their equipment compromised. The official report, penned by a flustered security chief eager to avoid censure, cited an unexpected equipment malfunction. No Kthar official would ever admit that an unarmed, unrestrained, primitive mammal, half their size, had overpowered 2 of their trained security personnel. The incident was an embarrassment. Grand Arbiter Vol'jin, the very picture of Kthar aristocratic disdain, had personally authorized the arena solution. Lyra, through a ventilation shaft she'd been meticulously studying, its dimensions, its access points, the patrol interval of the guard nearest to it, overheard part of the emergency council meeting. Vol'jin's voice, a reedy tenor despite his imposing height, this anomaly, specimen 7291, its aggressive tendencies make it unsuitable for continued study. Such unpredictability is inefficient. However, terminating it without extracting maximum scientific and, shall we say, entertainment value would also be inefficient. A dry chuckle had rippled through the council. The arena will provide ample data. And a rather definitive termination. A cold, knowing smile touched Lyra's lips in the darkness of the vent. Anomaly? She was no anomaly. She was a consequence. She was a reckoning they hadn't even begun to comprehend. The next nutrient-paced delivery came via Xylos. He set the tray down, his movements precise, almost hesitant. As he turned to leave, Lyra noticed it. The crystalline water container. One edge, usually uniformly blunted by Kthar's safety protocols, seemed different. Minutely so. A fraction less rounded, perhaps even possessing a hint of a sharpened angle. A trick of the dim cell lighting? Or had Xylos, in his silent, ambiguous way, offered something? A tool? A chance? He avoided her gaze, his own epidermis shifting through unreadable patterns of iridescent blues and greens. Lyra wasn't sure what to make of it. Trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. But the Kthar had made one critical error. They assumed being a specimen meant being passive. As the transport field that would take her to the arena pre-chamber began to hum to life, Lyra palmed the crystalline water container. Its subtly altered edge pressed against her skin, a small, sharp promise. Xylos's face, as he made a final check from outside her cell, was still an unreadable mask, his multifaceted eyes quickly averting from hers. Was he a reluctant, microscopic crack in the Kthar's monolithic arrogance, or simply another cog, indifferent to her fate? The answer, she knew, would have to wait. The Gorfang Ravager wouldn't. The roar of the crowd in the Xylosian Colosseum, a vast amphitheater carved from obsidian-like rock and crowned with a shimmering crystalline dome, seeped even into the depths of the preparation chamber where Lyra now stood. It was a primal sound, a cacophony of clicks, chitters, and resonant hums from 37 different species, all baying for spectacle, for blood. The Kthar were masters of this particular brand of theater. They were ready for a slaughter. They had engineered the perfect beast for it. And now, esteemed viewers across the Kthar dominion and our honored interspecies guests. A voice, smooth and artificially enhanced, boomed from unseen speakers, vibrating the very floor beneath Lyra's feet. Direct your ocular implants, adjust your sensory filters. Prepare yourselves for the pride of the Kthar homeworld, the ultimate expression of predatory evolution. Behold! The Gorfang Ravager. Even in the dim holding chamber, the collective gasp and subsequent crescendo of alien excitement from the Xylosian Colosseum was palpable. The Gorfang Ravager. Lyra had gleaned enough from careless Kthar guard chatter to form a terrifying mental image. 600 kilograms of evolutionary malice, they'd called it. A nightmare-given flesh and chitinous armor, so tough that standard Kthar energy pulses barely scratched it. Triple-jointed pincers, capable of crushing the reinforced exoskeleton of a full-grown Kthar warrior with contemptuous ease. Chemoreceptors so acute they could detect a single drop of blood in an Olympic-sized pool. And a brain, while not capable of higher reasoning, that had been honed over millennia for one singular, brutal function, the relentless pursuit and bloody consumption of anything that moved. It was, by all accounts, a biological tank designed for maximum lethality. Above, in the luxury observation pod suspended high over the arena sands, Grand Arbiter Vol'jin sipped delicately from a goblet of luminescent, fermented nectar. He turned to a smirking diplomat from the Crystallian Alliance, a being whose crystalline facial structures shifted with amusement. The human specimen has proven uncooperative since its acquisition, as you know, Vol'jin remarked, his voice a dry whisper that nonetheless carried authority. Too unpredictable for proper study, far too fragile for any practical labor. Perhaps after today's rather public demonstration, future acquisitions from their primitive sphere will prove more compliant. A lesson, shall we say, in the natural order. The Crystallian diplomat flexed its mandibles in what passed for a smile among its kind. Indeed, Grand Arbiter. Efficiency and enlightenment, a most Kthar combination. The betting consoles across the Xylosian Colosseum flared with frantic activity, the odds shifting astronomically against the human. 752 to 1. A few Kthar even wagered on survival duration, down to the nearest 5 seconds. Most bets were on death by dismemberment. It was considered the most likely, and for many, the most entertaining outcome. But below, in the dim, metallic-smelling preparation chamber, Lyra wasn't praying. She wasn't trembling. She was a pillar of calm in the heart of a manufactured storm. Her eyes were closed, her breathing regulated into precise 6-second cycles. 4 in, hold for 1, 2 out. It was a technique honed over years of pushing her body and mind to their absolute limits. To the Kthar guard monitoring her through a one-way observation panel, she appeared to be engaged in another of her primitive ritualistic behaviors, perhaps a futile prayer to one of Earth's many forgotten deities. His report would note as much. In reality, Lyra's mind was a whirlwind of focused activity. Her combat cognition, that state of cold, methodical clarity military psychologists had once labeled, was fully active. She was mentally mapping the arena based on the architectural schematics she briefly glimpsed on a technician's datapad during a transport. Calculating angles, assessing distances, visualizing choke points, formulating contingencies upon contingencies. She catalogued the meager items her captors had so generously provided: the thin, silvery fabric garment, surprisingly useful, embedded with temperature-regulating fibers that would help counter the humid, foggy conditions that Kthar apparently favored for the Gorfang. The crystalline water container, its edge now subtly, almost imperceptibly, weaponizable thanks to Xylosa's oversight. And the maintenance tool, a blunt, 20-centimeter metal rod with a hooked end, primarily designed for adjusting ventilation systems. An inadequate club at best. Not ideal, but then, nothing about her situation was workable. That's all she needed. She thought of the Kthar vulnerabilities she'd painstakingly gleaned. That specific sonic frequency that caused them such distress. Could the arena's massive crystalline dome be made to vibrate, to resonate in such a way if impacted correctly? A long shot, certainly. But one of many she held in reserve. What about Xylos? His actions with the water container, it was a tiny detail, easily missed, easily deniable. A deliberate risk he took for her. Or simply a moment of Kthar carelessness she was reading too much into. The puzzle of Xylos remained, a small, persistent question mark in the back of her ruthlessly efficient mind. For now, it had to. Final preparation interval commencing, an automated voice, devoid of any emotion, announced in the chamber. Arena entry in 3 minutes. Lyra opened her eyes. She rose smoothly, no wasted motion, no tremor in her limbs. The Kthar guard at the observation panel, a different one this time, one whose iridescent skin displayed the telltale blue-green mottling of nervous anticipation, flinched almost imperceptibly. Her sheer, unearthly calm was unsettling. The guard's epidermis flickered briefly to an alarm color, a deep, anxious orange, before stabilizing. From a safer distance, a senior Kthar researcher, monitoring Lyra through a separate, magnified feed, made a clinical note into his own log. Remarkable composure. Or perhaps, a complete lack of situational awareness. Record that the specimen appears to lack appropriate survival instincts, even when faced with imminent termination. Consistent with primitive neurological limitations. As the shimmering, crackling energies of the transport field began to coalesce around her, Lyra allowed herself the faintest, almost predatory smile. It was an expression the Kthar, had they possessed the cultural context to understand its chilling significance, would have found profoundly alarming. 3 days, she thought, the hum of the transporter growing louder. They gave me 3 days to prepare for this battle. 3 days to observe their facility's operations, 3 days to identify weaknesses in their security protocols, 3 days to listen. A ghost of a smile. 3 days was 2 more than I needed. The transport field crackled and dissipated with a sharp hiss, depositing Lyra onto the packed sand at the eastern edge of the vast Xylosian Colosseum. The roar of the assembled species, tens of thousands strong, washed over her, a physical wave of sound and alien emotion. Before her, artificial fog, thick and cloying, billowed across the arena floor, reducing visibility to perhaps 8 meters. It carried an acrid, chemical smell, likely designed, she surmised, to stimulate the Gorfang Ravager's already legendary hunting instincts. Wonderful. And from somewhere deep within that swirling, opaque mist, a low, vibrating hiss. A sound that registered in the most primitive, ancient part of her brain as one thing, and one thing only. Danger. Pure, unadulterated danger. Lyra dropped, instinctively, as something massive and impossibly fast sliced through the acrid, artificial fog where her head had been mere milliseconds before. The fight for her life, for something far more than her life, had begun. No more planning. Only action. Only survival. Only, she vowed with a sudden, icy certainty, victory. A searing pain erupted in her left forearm. Hot. Agonizing. The Gorfong Ravager, emerging from the swirling mists like a nightmare-given form, had struck. One of its three primary hunting appendages, a triple-jointed limb ending in a serrated pincer like a monstrous obsidian scalpel, had lashed out with blinding speed. It caught her arm, slicing through the supposedly protective Kthar garment and deep into flesh. First blood. Hers. The Xylosian Colosseum erupted. A harmonic crescendo of trilling, chittering excitement vibrated through the crystalline dome. Up in the Grand Arbiter's luxury observation pod, Vol'jin allowed himself a thin, satisfied nod. Predictable, he murmured to the attentive Crystallian Alliance diplomat beside him. Note the specimen's reaction time. Impressive for its species, I concede. But ultimately, inadequate. He took a delicate sip of his fermented nectar. Down on the crimson-staining sands, Lyra didn't scream. She didn't even glance at the deep, freely bleeding gash. Pain was an old acquaintance. Instead, with a movement so deliberate it was almost contemptuous, she smeared her own bright blood across her right palm, then onto the pitted surface of the Kthar maintenance tool. Then, with swift, calculated movements, she wiped more blood onto a jagged, gray rocky outcropping nearest to her position. A tactical gambit. Observing from his scientific monitoring station, the Kthar xenobiologist, Dr. Nail, leaned closer to his console, his multifaceted eyes dilating. Curious behavior, he dictated into his log, his voice a low hum. Perhaps a primitive attempt at symbolic defense. Many lesser species engage in such ritualistic actions when confronted with inescapable mortality. The Gorfong, its sensory stalks quivering, clearly stimulated by the rich scent of fresh blood, charged again. Its massive, segmented body, a fortress of armored chitin plates, accelerated with frightening momentum. This time, Lyra didn't attempt to evade completely. Instead, she pivoted at the last possible microsecond, her body a blur of motion, using the beast's own terrifying momentum to guide its thunderous path directly toward the blood-marked rocks. Crunch. The creature's immense bulk crashed against the outcropping, dislodging several sharp, flat fragments of stone. The impact shuddered through the arena floor. Before the dust even settled, Lyra snatched up the largest, palm-sized fragment, its edge wickedly sharp. A new weapon added to her limited arsenal. As the Gorfong recovered, shaking its armored head, something shifted in Lyra's posture. The initial defensive crouch transformed into something more balanced, more purposeful. In Grand Arbiter Vol'jin's pod, a junior Kthar scientist monitoring Lyra's biometric data frowned at his console, a hesitant appendage rising. Honored Arbiter, he began, his voice tight with something akin to alarm, the specimen's neurochemical patterns, they have altered significantly. Adrenaline levels have stabilized rather than escalated. Blood pressure has actually decreased. These readings do not match expected pre-terminal fear responses. In fact, Vol'jin dismissed the observation with an impatient wave of his slender, six-fingered hand. Irrelevant. A peculiarity of their primitive nervous system. The first contact has been established. Termination will proceed as expected. Continue monitoring. Down in the arena, surrounded by swirling mist and facing a perfect killing machine, Lyra almost smiled. A chilling, fleeting expression. She had what she needed now. blood to attract and misdirect the beast. A better understanding of its movement patterns, its charging radius. And most importantly, a plan. The Gorfang Ravager charged again, its segmented body undulating through the mist like some nightmarish, unstoppable freight train. Instead of retreating, Lyra did the unthinkable. She sprinted directly toward it. A collective gasp, a sudden, shocked silence, rippled through the tens of thousands of Cthar and other alien spectators. Even Vol'jin paused, his goblet halfway to his lips. What was this? 3 meters before certain collision, Lyra abruptly dropped. She slid across the damp, packed sand, passing directly beneath the Gorfang's armored underbelly, a space barely half a meter high. As she slid, a blur of motion and desperate courage, she drove the jagged stone fragment she'd acquired upwards, into the softer, less protected tissue between the creature's chitin plates. She dragged it hard, creating a lengthy, ragged gash. The Gorfang emitted a high-pitched, ear-splitting screech of agony and surprise that caused several Cthar spectators in the lower tiers to recoil, their auditory senses overwhelmed. Fascinating. Dr. Nail murmured, his scientific detachment warring with a dawning sense of disbelief. The specimen has identified a structural vulnerability. Our own Cthar warriors required specialized sonic resonance scanning equipment to locate the precise weak point. Lyra rolled to her feet behind the thrashing beast as its hunting appendages flailed wildly, blindly. She immediately circled toward its left flank, staying within the densest part of the artificial fog, using the swirling vapor as her ally. The Gorfang spun with surprising agility for its immense size, but Lyra had already disappeared from its direct line of sight. Now, the hunter became confused. Multiple blood scents permeated the arena, from Lyra's still bleeding arm, from the smears she had deliberately placed on the rocks, and now, most potently, from the beast's own grievous injury. The Gorfang's sensory stalks twitched erratically, its primitive brain struggling to distinguish prey from self, fresh trail from old. Lyra utilized this crucial moment of confusion. Working quickly, she tore another strip from her protective garment and wrapped it tightly around her bleeding forearm. Not to stop the bleeding entirely, she needed that scent trail, but to control it, to manage her resources. Then, she smashed the crystalline water container against a rock. It shattered, as she knew it would, into several wickedly sharp, almost invisible shards. She selected 2 of the longest, deadliest-looking fragments, their edges like razors. The Gorfang, having finally oriented to what it perceived as the strongest blood scent, the smear Lyra had left on the large outcropping, charged the rocks with renewed fury. Lyra timed her move perfectly. Just as the beast crashed into the unyielding stone, sending tremors through the ground, she vaulted onto and then over the rocks, sailing over its armored back. As she passed above it, she drove both crystalline shards, one in each hand, deep into the heavily armored but still vulnerable junction between the creature's massive head and its first primary body segment. She was targeting the main neural cluster that controlled its primary hunting appendages. The effect was immediate, catastrophic. The Gorfang's 3 front limbs spasmed uncontrollably, their previously coordinated, lethal movements dissolving into a chaotic, twitching frenzy. The beast thrashed violently, its immense body slamming against the arena walls, even destroying one of the environmental control units in the process. As a consequence, sections of the artificial fog began to dissipate, creating pockets of clearer, starker visibility. In Grand Arbiter Vol'jin's observation pod, the atmosphere had shifted from smug certainty to a deeply uneasy confusion. This behavior, it contradicts all documented human combat patterns, insisted the senior Cthar military observer, a grizzled veteran of several minor planetary pacifications. Its skin flickered rapidly between analysis green and a growing, concerned yellow. They typically rely on technological advantages, overwhelming firepower, not this adaptive improvisation. Lyra wasn't finished. Not even close. As the Gorfong struggled to coordinate its remaining functional limbs, confused and clearly in agony, she retrieved her Kthar maintenance tool. She circled again, moving with a dancer's deadly grace, towards the creature's blind spot. The Gorfong Ravager, apex predator of an entire world, was now experiencing something no creature of its evolutionary caliber had ever needed to develop a response for: fear. It began making erratic, uncontrolled movements. With calculated, almost surgical precision, Lyra jammed the maintenance tool's hooked end deep into a primary respiratory opening she'd identified near the base of the beast's armored skull. Then, with all her strength, with every ounce of her focused will, she wrenched it sideways. The sound of cracking chitin, loud and sharp, echoed through the now eerily silent Xylosian Colosseum. More vulnerable, softer tissue was exposed beneath. Without a moment's hesitation, Lyra plunged her bloodied hand into the opening, grabbed something vital, something that pulsed and writhed, and pulled. Thick, black ichor, the Gorfang's lifeblood, sprayed across her face and chest, but she didn't flinch. She didn't release her hold. She maintained her grip, twisting and tearing at whatever critical organ or nerve cluster she had seized. Throughout the vast arena, betting consoles began to flicker and shut down. The Kthar neural wagering network was encountering a scenario its complex algorithms had long ago categorized as statistically impossible. High Arbiter Vol'jin's normally vibrant epidermis had faded to a pale, sickly, almost translucent blue. This cannot be happening, it whispered, the words barely audible, directed at no one in particular. His prized fermented nectar remained untouched. Down on the blood-soaked sands, Lyra finally released her grip and stepped back, her chest heaving. The Gorfong Ravager, the pinnacle of Kthar predatory design, the terror of its homeworld, convulsed one last time, its entire body arching in a final, silent agony. It collapsed heavily onto its side, its remaining functional limbs twitching in ever-decreasing intervals. And then, a strange sound filled the arena. Not the dying gasps of the beast. Something else. Something that sent an icy chill of primal dread through every single Kthar present. Lyra was laughing. A low, guttural, chilling laughter that held no humor, only a terrifying, triumphant release. Threat reassessment, the Kthar military observer croaked, its voice barely audible over the stunned, absolute silence of the crowd. Threat reassessment recommended. Immediately. The Gorfong Ravager wasn't quite dead yet, merely incapacitated, its biological backup system struggling, and failing, to compensate for catastrophic, systemic damage. Its breathing came in labored, gurgling heaves as the thick, viscous black ichor pooled beneath its massive, unmoving form. One functioning sensory stalk still, almost pathetically, tracked Lyra's movements, the primitive brain behind it processing an emotion it had never before needed to evolve. The cold, dawning understanding of its own imminent death. Lyra circled slowly, deliberately, to face the dying creature head-on, maintaining eye contact with its single, central visual receptor. A peculiar form of respect, perhaps. A warrior acknowledging a worthy, if ultimately doomed, adversary. Even while preparing to end it. The last vestiges of the artificial fog had almost completely dissipated now, giving the entire, silent, horrified arena an unobstructed, crystal-clear view of what would happen next. She approached the dying Gorfong Ravager methodically, the Kthar maintenance tool clutched in one ichor-slick hand, the jagged stone she prized from the arena floor in the other. The beast, a broken mountain of chitin and evolutionary malice, made one final, feeble attempt to snap at her with its ruined maw, but the movement lacked any coordination, any real strength. A pathetic twitch. Lyra easily sidestepped the telegraphed, dying lunge. Then, with a chilling precision that spoke volumes more than any scream could, she drove the sharp stone directly into the creature's single, large central eye. Buried it to the hilt. The Gorfang's colossal body convulsed in a spasm so violent it briefly lifted its tons of dead weight half a meter off the blood-soaked sand. But Lyra didn't relent. She was beyond mercy, beyond Cthar theatrics. In one fluid, brutal motion, she jammed the hooked end of the maintenance tool into the punctured socket where the stone had created an entry point. Then, using it as a lever, she applied her entire body weight, driving it deeper, searching for the beast's neural center. A sickening, wet crack echoed through the suddenly, utterly silent Silosian Colosseum. Something fundamental, something vital, gave way deep inside the Gorfang's armored skull. Lyra twisted the tool with a cold, clinical precision, the movement disturbingly reminiscent of someone uncorking a particularly stubborn bottle. The Gorfang's remaining functional limbs twitched erratically for a moment, then went completely, irrevocably still. A final, rattling exhalation, like wind through a broken pipe, escaped its multiple breathing orifices. The apex predator of the Cthar homeworld, the terror of their swamps, the ultimate killing machine, was dead. Throughout the vast, crystalline domed arena, 37 different species of sentient beings, representing a significant portion of the known galactic powers, sat in absolute, profound silence. No chittering. No buzzing. No harmonic resonance of bloodthirsty excitement. Just the horrified, stunned quiet of collective, dawning realization. This wasn't supposed to happen. This couldn't happen. In the opulent luxury of the observation pod, Grand Arbiter Vol'jin's normally vibrant, iridescent epidermis had blanched to a colorless, almost ghastly transparency never before observed in a living, healthy Cthar. He looked diminished. Frail. Open. He finally whispered, his voice a strained, thin harmonic of pure, undiluted fear, a sound, a tone, not heard from a Cthar official of his standing for at least 7 generations. Open the gates. Lyra stood upright, breathing heavily but steadily, a small, indomitable figure amidst the carnage she had wrought. Black, tar-like ichor, the Gorfang's very essence, covered nearly every visible part of her body, giving her the terrifying appearance of some primordial, blood-soaked demon conjured from the darkest depths of Cthar mythology. She slowly wiped her face with the back of her hand, leaving a grotesque, viscous smear across her already battle-stained features. Then, she lifted her gaze, her eyes burning with an intensity that seemed to pierce the reinforced transpastel of the observation pod. She looked directly at Grand Arbiter Vol'jin, at the assembled, frozen Cthar dignitaries. And she smiled. It wasn't a smile of warmth or relief. It was a haunting, predatory baring of teeth, an expression of such profound, chilling triumph that it would sear itself into the neural pathways of every Cthar who witnessed it, haunting their dream cycles for years to come. The fight had lasted exactly 20 seconds from the moment the Gorfang had drawn first blood. 20 seconds. An eternity. A revolution. The arena's automated systems, programmed for Cthar victories and the efficient disposal of defeated alien combatants, flickered uncertainly. Medical drones, usually so quick to descend and collect remains, hovered near the arena floor, their optical sensors swiveling, their programming clearly unequipped for this unprecedented scenario. They were designed to retrieve corpses, not to offer assistance to a survivor who had just systematically dismantled their civilization's most feared champion. Lyra ignored them completely. Her attention, unwavering, was fixed on the massive, lifeless carcass at her feet. With a grunt of exertion, driven by a will that seemed to defy the very laws of biology and physics, she grabbed one of the Gorfang's massive, triple-jointed hunting appendages. And she began to drag. The creature's 600-kilogram bulk resisted, then yielded, leaving a wide, dark, viscous smear across the pristine sand of the Xylosian Colosseum as she hauled it with grim, unwavering purpose towards the main exit portal. The same ceremonial exit portal usually reserved for victorious Cthar champions during their meticulously orchestrated, self-congratulatory combat events. Every step, every straining muscle in her comparatively tiny frame, was a statement. This wasn't merely survival. This was dominance. This was a display. This was a language universally understood across all species, regardless of their evolutionary path or technological sophistication. The message couldn't have been clearer if she had painstakingly composed it in Icthar's own vaunted mathematical poetry, I am not prey. In the spectator sections, the profound silence had finally given way to a low, anxious, horrified murmuring. Many Cthar were already leaving, scrambling for the exits, their iridescent skin flickering in chaotic patterns that indicated severe psychological distress. Others remained frozen in their observation platforms, their neural implants working overtime, recording every unbelievable detail of an event that would undoubtedly upend centuries of established xenobiological doctrine and shatter their species' carefully constructed narrative of inherent superiority. Near one of the service exits, the Cthar guard Xylos stood apart from the panicked throng. His helmet still obscured his expression, but he wasn't fleeing. He remained utterly still, a solitary, unreadable figure watching Lyra's laborious, defiant progress. What was he thinking? Was this the outcome he had, in some small, inexplicable way, facilitated? Or was he merely as stunned as the rest of his kind? The ambiguity of his presence was a silent, unsettling counterpoint to the overt chaos unfolding around him. The security containment field is still active, honored arbiter, one of Vol'jin's trembling aides stammered, its voice barely audible, its own skin a sickly, mottled green. She cannot actually exit the arena. Grand Arbiter Vol'jin didn't respond. His gaze, wide and unfocused, was fixed on the human who had now, impossibly, reached the massive ceremonial exit. The colossal doors, forged from some dark, unknown Cthar alloy, remained stubbornly closed, their intricate control systems calibrated to respond only to Cthar biosignatures. A final, arrogant failsafe. Lyra stood before them, the dead, 600-kilogram Gorfang Ravager a grotesque trophy at her feet. And she simply waited. Her posture conveyed neither frustration nor impatience. Merely the absolute, unshakable certainty that the doors would open. In the diplomatic section, chaos reigned. Representatives from 17 different starfaring worlds were already activating their emergency communication protocols, their voices a babble of alien languages relaying the unbelievable events. The Crystalline Alliance diplomat, who had earlier so smugly discussed quarantine measures for humans with Vol'jin, was now frantically composing a high-priority, encrypted message to his homeworld, recommending an immediate, top-to-bottom revision of all first contact procedures regarding the species known as humanity. The Solarian Hegemony Observer, whose species had been quietly contemplating a strategic military action against fledgling Earth colonies in the Perseus Arm, was, with equally frantic haste, quietly deleting several terabytes of highly sensitive strategic planning documents from its neural storage. Across the entire Cthar homeworld, the implications were rippling outward like a seismic shock wave. Their most cherished philosophical foundation, elevated consciousness through superior evolution, had just been brutally, irrevocably undermined by 20 seconds of what they would have once dismissed as primitive, savage efficiency. Their carefully constructed, millennia-old narrative of galactic dominance was collapsing in real time. Open the doors. Grand Arbiter Vol'jin finally choked out, his voice cracking, carrying the unmistakable, raw harmonic of pure, existential fear. He slammed a fist onto his console. Protocol be damned. Open the blasted doors. The massive exit portal of the Xylosian Colosseum, a gateway that had never before yielded to a non-Cathar, began to slide open with a deep, groaning sound that seemed to echo the collective groan of a dying empire. As it did, emergency alerts, shrill and insistent, began to blare across the Cathar capital city and, moments later, throughout the government district. Security forces mobilized. Scientists scrambled to update threat assessments. Diplomatic channels overloaded with urgent, panicked communications to every Cathar outpost, every colony, every ship across the galaxy. Dragging her grisly trophy, Lyra, specimen 7291, the anomaly, the human, stepped through the slowly opening doorway and out of the arena, leaving behind a civilization in crisis, a stunned galaxy, and the indelible, bloody proof that even gods can bleed. The Xylosian Colosseum, that once proud marvel of Cathar engineering, that crystalline monument to their supposed cultural refinement, stood under the fading light of its 3 alien suns, the freshly raked sand now a canvas of carnage and revolution. The prismatic patterns, once symbols of their artistry, still danced across that sand, beautiful and utterly, terrifyingly oblivious to the paradigm shift they had just illuminated. The echoes of those 20 seconds in the Xylosian Colosseum resonated far beyond its blood-stained sands, spreading like a contagion of disbelief and dawning terror. Within hours, the Cathar homeworld was under an unprecedented security lockdown. Within 2 standard solar cycles, the august members of the Galactic Sentient Species Classification Board convened an emergency session, their usual bureaucratic languor replaced by a frantic urgency. The name, humanity, was no longer a dismissible footnote in their extensive catalogues of lesser species. It was now a blazing, unavoidable headline. Category 1, approach with extreme caution. The board's new designation for Homo sapiens thundered across the myriad channels of the galactic net, a pronouncement that sent shivers down the carapaces, through the pseudopods, and across the varied biologies of countless civilizations. 17 previously planned, meticulously orchestrated first contact missions to nascent Earth colonies in the outer Orion Spur were indefinitely, perhaps permanently, postponed. The Cathar themselves, their entire societal structure reeling from the psychic shock, began the humiliating process of rewriting millennia of their core philosophy. The concept of elevated consciousness through superior evolution was now hastily, awkwardly amended to include a lengthy addendum on anomalous evolutionary divergence and the unpredictable X factors of lesser species exhibiting unexpected survival imperatives. It was, to put it mildly, a mess. And Lyra? Somewhere deep within the labyrinthine, now fear-drenched Cathar governmental complex, she was no longer referred to as specimen 7291. That designation had been wiped from all official records with a speed that bordered on panic. Her new, hastily assigned status, typed into the Cathar Central Registry by a trembling, 6-fingered hand, translated roughly from their complex mathematical lexicon to honored diplomatic guest with unrestricted access privileges. Quite the promotion. She sat in a lavishly appointed chamber, the kind once reserved for visiting Cathar high arbiters or the most esteemed alien emissaries. A Cathar attendant, its iridescent skin a pale, sickly green, a color combination indicating profound nervous distress, offered her a tray of Cathar delicacies, intricate constructions of nutrient paste and exotic, bioluminescent fungi. Grand Arbiter Vol'jin, Lyra noted with a certain grim satisfaction, was conspicuously absent. Probably drafting his resignation, or perhaps undergoing intensive psychological reconditioning. Dr. Nail, the xenobiologist, was present, however. He approached Lyra with a deference that bordered on outright terror, his usual scientific detachment completely shattered. Gone was the clinical observer. In his place stood a Kthar clearly grappling with the collapse of his entire worldview. Your adaptability, honored guest, he began, his voice a low, hesitant hum, it defies our every understanding, our most fundamental precepts of biological capability. Lyra simply looked at him, a faint, almost imperceptible hint of her earlier chilling, arena-born smile playing on her lips. She said nothing. She didn't need to. Dr. Nail, misinterpreting her silence as an invitation to continue, or perhaps simply compelled by a need to understand the incomprehensible, nervously extended a thin data pad towards her. We have been re-evaluating all data pertaining to your species, honored guest. There are discrepancies. Anomalies we previously dismissed. On the screen of the datapad, amidst complex Kthar script, a familiar geometric symbol glowed faintly, the same intricate, recurring symbol Lyra had seen on Kthar tech, on their uniforms. And now, she saw it was subtly, almost invisibly, etched into the very casing of the datapad itself. Next to it, new data scrolled, a detailed, shockingly comprehensive map of Kthar's secret hyperspace routes, their most zealously guarded strategic asset. How? Her mind flashed to Xylos, the young guard with the unreadable eyes. The subtly altered water container. His still, unwavering presence as chaos erupted in the arena. Was he part of some internal Kthar dissident faction, one that sought to break the rigid, arrogant control of the Arbiter's regime? Or had he simply admired her raw strength, her impossible defiance, and seen in her an opportunity for his own survival, his own advancement, by ensuring this critical intelligence eventually reached her? Xylos's legacy, his true motives, remained an intriguing, perhaps permanently unanswered, question. A ghost in the Kthar machine. The Kthar neural wagering network, once so confident in its predictions, had gone silent on any scenario involving humans. Some bets, it seemed, weren't worth calculating, especially when they involved a species that could turn overwhelming disadvantage into a bloody, galaxy-shaking victory. Later, Lyra stood alone, looking out of a massive viewport at the swirling, multi-hued clouds of the Kthar homeworld below, a planet, an empire, she had single-handedly thrown into existential chaos with 20 seconds of brutal, focused will. She thought of their arrogant motto, the one that had defined their interactions with the galaxy for eons, elevated consciousness through superior evolution. A grim smile touched her lips. Evolution, she thought, her gaze sweeping across the alien cityscape, is adaptation. And sometimes, adaptation requires a little blood. The future of the galaxy, once so predictably mapped by Kthar ambition, now stretched out, an unwritten, uncertain path. The shattered illusions of Kthar superiority had left a power vacuum, and a host of unsettling questions. What was the true source of human resilience, that pathological adaptability the Kthar had so fatally underestimated? And if one human could do this, what might an awakened humanity achieve? Were there other underestimated species out there, biding their time, waiting for their own moment to rise from the crimson sands? The universe, it seemed, was about to find out.